In 1989, a young woman jogging in New York's Central Park was raped and beaten nearly to death. This high-profile attack upon a white investment banker in the heart of the city was quickly called the crime of the century. There was intense public pressure to solve the case, and, indeed, the police quickly arrested 5 young, 14 to 16 years old, men who were black and Latino. They had been part of a larger group of young men harassing passersby in another part of the park. After intense interrogations ranging from 14 to 30 hours in length, 4 of the 5 confessed to the crime. The 5 were charged with the attack. Importantly, the boys soon recanted their confessions, which they blamed on police coercion. No physical evidence linked the young men to the crime. No physical evidence indicated that there was more than one attacker. The semen found in the victim did not match any of the young men. The 4 confessions were inconsistent with each other and with the physical evidence from the crime scene. Nonetheless, the young men were convicted and sent to jail. Real estate developer Donald Trump called for their swift execution in a full-page newspaper ad. The Central Park 5 were Kevin Richardson, 14, Raymond Santana, 14, Antron McCrae, 15, Yusuf Salam, 15, and 16-year-old Corey Wise. Richardson and Santana were the first to be taken in by police on reports of intimidating behavior and muggings. McCrae, Salam, and Wise were taken in the following day. Wise wasn't considered a suspect at the time, but wanted to offer moral support to Salam. Focus soon shifted to the jogger Trisha Maley, and the 5 boys were interrogated for at least 7 hours without their parents, before 4 made videotaped confessions to detectives. All admitted they touched or restrained Maley, while 1 or more of the others assaulted her. New York in the 80s and 90s was much more dangerous than it is today. Race relations were strained, especially when it came to the police. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, then a New York property mogul, seemed convinced the teens were guilty. He spent a reported $85,000, around £138,000 today, on 4 full-page adverts in New York newspapers, titled, "Bring back the death penalty, bring back our police." He wrote, "I want to hate these murderers, and I always will. I am not looking to psychoanalyze or understand them. I am looking to punish them." In an interview with CNN at the time, he said, "Maybe hate is what we need if we're going to get something done." It seemed to feed into the atmosphere of high crime rates and poor race relations in the city at the time. Talking about the adverts, Salam later told The Guardian, "We were all afraid. Our families were afraid. Our loved ones were afraid. For us to walk around as if we had a target on our backs." Had this been the 1950s, that sick type of justice that they wanted, somebody from that darker place of society would have most certainly came to our homes, dragged us from our beds, and hung us from trees in Central Park. 13 years later, Matias Reyes, who was serving a life sentence for murder, confessed to the crime. Indeed, his DNA matched the semen recovered from the victim. His was the only semen recovered from the victim. The attack on the jogger was carried out in a similar manner to his other rapes, none of which involved any other perpetrator. Matias Reyes had been convicted of a string of rapes and a murder and was in prison. He'd come across one of the Central Park 5, Corey Wise, twice during imprisonment. In 2002, a year after his second meeting, Reyes told the police he was the one who'd attacked and sexually assaulted Maley when he was 17, and said he'd acted alone. He was able to tell police details about the attack that wasn't public knowledge, and his DNA matched that at the scene of the crime. One of the crimes he'd been found guilty of was another rape 2 days before the Maley incident, but he was never a suspect in the Central Park jogger case. Reyes later said, "I know it's hard for people to understand, after 12 years, why a person would actually come forward to take responsibility for a crime. At first I was afraid, but at the end of the day, I felt it was definitely the right thing to do." Eventually, the 5 men were cleared of all charges, having almost served their full sentences. Reyes was never prosecuted for the crimes the 5 were accused of, as the statute of limitations had passed. Eventually, the Central Park 5 settled a wrongful conviction lawsuit with the City of New York for $41 million. However, the indisputable and overwhelming evidence of their innocence did not change the minds of The lead prosecutor, who claimed that the 5 young men were indeed still guilty and that Reyes was simply an additional perpetrator, an unindicted co-ejaculator. The head detective, who said, "This lunatic Reyes concocts this wild story, and these people fell for it." The Central Park Five, as the media dubbed them, maintained their innocence since that fateful night. Each served 5 to 13 years in prison until in 2002, DNA evidence set them free. Here's where the exonerated 5 are today. Salam was 14 when jurors found him guilty of rape, assault, robbery, and riot in connection with the assault of 28-year-old investment banker Trisha Maley, as well as separate assaults on 2 male joggers. Salam served nearly 7 years in an upstate juvenile detention facility. All the while, he was innocent. In an October 2016 editorial published in the Washington Post, Salam said the police officers interrogated and deprived him and his 4 co-defendants of food, drink, and sleep for more than 24 hours. The married father continues to speak about his ordeal, and in 2016, Salam received a Lifetime Achievement Award from President Barack Obama. His memoir, Better, Not Bitter, Living on Purpose in the Pursuit of Racial Justice, was published in 2021 and calls for prison reform. Just 16 when jurors convicted him of assault, sexual abuse, and riot, Wise was sentenced to 5 to 15 years behind bars and released after serving 12. After the verdict was read, Wise turned his attention toward the prosecutors. "You're going to pay for this," Wise shouted in court. "Jesus is going to get you. You made this up." Wise still lives in New York City and is often asked to speak about his experience. Through his work with the Innocence Project, Wise also advocates for the rights of the wrongly convicted, as well as criminal justice reform. Richardson was 14 when he was accused of attacking and sexually assaulting the Central Park jogger. Eventually, he was convicted of attempted murder, rape, sodomy, assault, and robbery, and served more than 5 years for a crime he did not commit. Likewise, Richardson also does work for the Innocence Project, advocating for the rights of others who've been wrongfully accused. Santana was 14 when he lost 5 years of his life following his conviction on rape, assault, robbery, and riot charges. Today, Santana lives in Atlanta with his daughter. In 2018, the filmmaker launched a clothing line called Park Madison NYC. The following year, the company announced a portion of the proceeds from selling its Brotherhood tee, bearing the first names of the Central Park Five, would go toward the Innocence Project, according to its Facebook page. McCrae, Wright, was 15 when he was tried and convicted on rape, assault, robbery, and riot charges. Sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison, he was released after serving 6. He is living down south, where he's raising his children. Years before becoming president, prominent New Yorker Donald Trump took a personal interest in implicating the Central Park Five. Days after the attack on the jogger, Trump paid for full-page ads in 4 major newspapers, advocating for the reinstatement of the death penalty. The ads did not specifically mention the Central Park Five, but called for a beefed-up police force and stiffer penalties for offenders. During his presidential run, Trump reinforced his earlier position, telling CNN in October 2016, "They admitted they were guilty. The police doing the original investigation say they were guilty." Even while president, Trump still wouldn't apologize for the 1989 ads. In June 2019, White House correspondent April Ryan asked Trump via Twitter and in person about the exonerated men, and he repeated his stance that they admitted their guilt. The reputations of the group once known as the Central Park Five were restored when, in June 2002, a convicted murderer and serial rapist named Matias Reyes, who was then already serving a life sentence for other crimes, admitted to attacking Maley. His DNA was subsequently matched to genetic material recovered from the scene. After their convictions were formally vacated, the 5 wrongly convicted men filed a civil suit against the city, which settled in 2014 for a reported $41 million. In 2016, the men received an additional $3.9 million settlement from the New York State Court of Claims. As their story became part of the national conversation thanks to the popularity of the Netflix series, the exonerated 5 received a standing ovation at the BET Awards in July 2019. "Your truth is the foundation your legacy will be built on," Santana said. In December 2022, ABC News reported that a Central Park entrance was renamed Gate of the Exonerated to honor the 5 men whose lives were forever changed because of their wrongful conviction. Reverend Al Sharpton, who was at the ceremony alongside NYC Mayor Eric Adams and members of the Exonerated 5, remarked, "As long as there's a Central Park, the story will be told about these 5 young men." On their release, the 5 filed a civil suit against New York City and received $41 million in the settlement, about £45.5 million today. Corey Wise received the biggest share of $12 million because he was the only one who'd been sentenced as an adult and so spent the longest time in prison. Speaking in a 2012 documentary about the case, he said, "You can forgive, but you won't forget. You won't forget what you lost. No money could bring that time back. No money could bring the life that was missing or the time that was taken away.